When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the GreaseCom YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be getting to the Battle of the Trident. Getting into, I believe this is part 9 of a Robert's Rebellion review and retrospective. We've kind of gotten to this big conflict. It's taken a very long time. And we're going to go through this, try to give it its due diligence, figure out what happened, why things happened, and some of the mysteries that still surround this conflict. Why did Rhaegar cross the river to begin with, giving himself a disadvantage? How did Rhaegar truly die? It seems there's some conflicting reports onto what happened. All will be hopefully answered, or we'll at least talk about some of the answers in today's video. But before we get into it, I wanted to say a thank you to all my members and Patreons that support me. If you did want to get videos early, consider that option. And let's get into it. So we left off in last video with the Battle of the Bells and the great conflict that led to Jon Connington being sent into exile. Another key thing we see is a couple marriages happen. Jon Arryn, in need of an heir, ends up marrying Lysa Tully, as well as Catelyn Tully marrying Ned Stark to replace the alliance that was lost, with Brandon dying to the hands of Aerys. And so what we end up seeing is all of our forces kind of heading towards King's Landing. And so that's what's going on with our rebellion side. Now let's talk about what else happens here. So we know that Lord Commander Hightower ends up going to find Rhaegar to spark Rhaegar into action, to do something. The war is turning against the Targaryens. They are in great need of his leadership. And so on one part of it, we see Rhaegar start to build up an army, whether that's from Reachmen or other houses that didn't go with Robert. Something we haven't talked a ton about is that not all of these houses that, let's say the Stormlands goes to Robert. Yes, there were houses that supported Robert, but not everyone. So we see that all throughout the world, right? It's very similar to the first Blackfire Rebellion, or even House of the Dragon and the Dance of the Dragons. We see a lot of houses within their own areas not supporting their liege lords. So, for instance, we see some River Lords, we see some Vale Lords, we see some Stormland Lords kind of go against them. And so we're going to see a very makeshift force in terms of what we see from Rhaegar. We see some Reach, we see some Vale forces, some Riverland forces, all these different type of forces mixed with Dornish forces. Now, something you might be thinking that's quite odd is the Dornish. They haven't really been involved in this war whatsoever. And that's quite weird, considering that Elia Martell is the princess. She is presumably going to be queen at some point, and you would think the Dornish would go to bat for her. But something that I find is quite interesting is not only Doran a very cautious man, but you think about the circumstances of this war, and another reason why Rhaegar just taking off with Lyanna was a horrible decision. It isolates one of your biggest allies to the throne. The Dornish have been fairly close to the throne ever since Daeron the Second came to power. And so you have to think, okay, that was a huge mistake. But Aerys, kind of recognizing that he needs a new fresh force and kind of feeling a little bit more desperate, he basically makes a threat to the Dornish that if you don't start doing something, he has Elia and her children as hostages. And so that sparks Doran to use a force of 10,000 men coming up from Dorne, and this is supposed to help Rhaegar's forces and kind of build up their numbers. And so as we see Rhaegar starting to head north, he ends up having a force of about 40,000 men, a fairly sizable force. You might even be thinking, right, with all of our massing of the rebellion's forces, that they would have something, similar. It's not actually the case. We're told that Rhaegar and the Loyalists had more men than Robert did. But that's not the whole case of it, right? We have to look at the quality of soldiers. We have to look at which side is more battle ready, right? And so when we look at the two sides and we analyze some things going on there's going to be some discrepancies, but there's some other stuff I want to build up here in the background that's going to be going on that I think is key. So other things to note is that Aerys starts to get more and more paranoid, going to the pyromancers more and more, making wildfire caches. And we're not going to really see how this is concluded really until the next episode, but I just want to put that in your mind that Aerys has already kind of started his contingency plan, just in case things kind of go wrong. Now, something else we need to be thinking about here. What was really going on in terms of the Tower of Joy? We know the 3 of the Kingsguard are left back with Lyanna, but what was Lyanna thinking herself? Rhaegar was going off to war. The tidings were not sounding particularly good, but what was Lyanna thinking at this time? It's her family on one side, and the person that she presumably loved, had their child. If that Rhaegar and Lyanna are a true thing, she had Rhaegar's child, so her loyalties were very divided. She must have felt very mixed at this time about what she could do and what she should do, as well as think about how many people have died for the mistakes that maybe she and Rhaegar have made. A lot is going on there. But let's kind of analyze what we see at this time between Rhaegar and Robert's forces. So the loyalists at this time, you have to remember, are not great soldiers. Only about a 10th of the soldiers here are actually knights, so that's about 4,000 of the 40,000. 10,000 are Dornish, and then the rest of it are, in a lot of ways, probably people that are not military trained, or if they are, they're of maybe a lower quality. They're not battle tested or battle hardened. A lot of these are going to be remnants from the Battle of Bells, so they maybe have some fighting experience, but they were on the losing side. Whereas you look at Robert's forces, a lot of them have been in multiple battles, especially if you've been with Robert since the beginning, right? A lot of these have been in battles when it comes to the Battle of the Bells or the battle at Goldtown. In a lot of ways, you're looking at a force that is ready for this conflict. They may have less numbers, but for one, their morale is higher. 2, they are more skilled and tested. And 3, they are fighting for something. They're fighting for people that they love that have been threatened to be killed. If you look at, again, Ned and Robert, Aerys wants their heads. Or if you look at the loyalty from the Northmen in terms of Brandon and Rickard Stark, both were killed by Aerys. So this side has more to fight for. That Rhaegar, this guy that steals Lyanna Stark and is having his way with her, everything would point to one side being united, being a force that could really do a lot of damage. And then let's take a look at Rhaegar's side. You have 10,000 Dornishmen who are basically here because their princess and Elia is being threatened. They don't really have a lot of reason to be here in their minds. If I was someone that was a Dornishman, I would be thinking, why am I here? Because this guy, Rhaegar, slept or stole this Stark girl? So he's retroactively dishonoring our princess and Elia? You see how the motivations get muddled. You can see how if the battle starts going badly, why wouldn't these people leave the fight? You also then have all these different forces scattered all across the country, whether that's from battles that have been lost or the Reach or whatnot, and you're thinking, we're fighting for what? Aerys, this mad king that is grotesque looking. He's making awful decisions. Are we fighting for Rhaegar, who, yes, may seem likable, but he made a very morally questionable action? What are we fighting for the loyalists? Are we fighting to keep the Targaryens on the throne? That's the issue that arises from both sides, is that Robert's side had more to gain from this. They were wanting to actually win this battle as a unit. They were a unit, an army that was a collective that actually could work together. Whereas Rhaegar's wasn't that. And that's not to say that, you know, this battle won't be close. It was actually very close. It seemed like it could go any way at any time. But I want to kind of build the stage. What would have been going on through the minds of the people that are fighting in this battle? And I also want to kind of list out just some house names that we know of are confirmed to be on both sides. So in terms of the rebel army, we have, again, the forces from the north. So that would include a lot of the major ones, but minor ones as well. The Bolton, Karstarks, Manderleys, Mormonts, Starks, Umbers. We have forces from the Vale, which would notably include, again, House Aaron and Corbray. We'd have some forces from the Riverlands, again, House Tully, but also House Mallister. But we also would see some houses in the Riverlands go to the other side, go to the loyalist side, in House Derry, Goodbrook, Mooten, and Rhaegar. And even House Frey, notably, was a little bit slow. They weren't really acting quickly, but it seemed like they were on their way. Now, you also say that some of the Stormlands were here as well, but again, they had kind of been scattered a bit from Ashford and the Siege of Storm's End, so they weren't the biggest help here, but they were here, so I wanted to mention them. And then the Targaryens, again, like we've talked about a little bit, it's a lot of the survivors of the Battle of the Bells, the Dornishmen, some of the houses of the Crownlands, notably House Boggs, Brune, and Crab, and a sizable host from the Reach. So, at this time, we see kind of our battle lines are drawn. But we have to kind of look at one other thing in terms of a conversation that we get with Jaime and Rhaegar that Jaime recounts. Rhaegar is very cocksure that he's going to win this battle, that when he gets back, things are going to be different. That can tell you a lot about Rhaegar's attitude towards the Battle of the Trident and this rebellion. It seems as though Rhaegar believed they were going to win regardless, because that's what his destiny was, because he was big in prophecy. He probably even believed that, again, when we look at Aegon's dream and that thing that's been introduced by George R. R. Martin going into the House of the Dragon stuff, and how that's maybe being implemented into the books, that's something that could be motivating Rhaegar. Rhaegar knows that his house will have to be on the throne for this prophecy to work. And so he realizes that that has to happen, right? He can't lose here. That doesn't make sense, because then the prophecy wouldn't work. So we see Rhaegar go to the Trident with his men. And they keep going until they meet at a river known to us now as the Ruby Ford. But we also know something else that's interesting. Rhaegar simply just didn't wait. He didn't play a defensive war. He didn't try to take the better position. He crosses the river to attack Robert. Now, there's a couple things we need to consider here. Did Rhaegar, kind of because of his cocksure attitude towards this war, realize that they were going to win regardless of the bad decision? Was it a situation to draw Robert out because Rhaegar knew that if he killed Robert, the war was probably over? Were both of them thinking that? I think Robert thought that if Robert could kill Rhaegar, the war would be over. The last real big Targaryen taken out, Aerys being the Mad King, you would kind of figure out where everything was going, right? Rhaegar was the last chance for House Targaryen. I think both had a very similar strategy. I think both of their strategies were kill the other military leader. Now, I think the Baratheons and the rebellion, showing how good they are in war, the experience they have, play this better. They play a defensible position. They let the Targaryens and the loyalist forces come to them, because they only attack once the loyalist force starts going into the river. And you have to be thinking about so many things that are going to be happening at this time. If you're a random soldier for the loyalists, you're going to be slowed down because of the mud, because of the water. All of this is going to be a factor, because those numbers don't matter if you're in a narrow crossing. We don't know how big the battlefield was. Was it a situation in which you could ford it at a certain point in the water, but you couldn't others, so you were funneled into a certain area where most of the fighting was taking place? We just don't know. But it seems quite likely, and maybe that's why Rhaegar is prompted to make this crossing. Because he saw his opportunity to cross now, because it was low enough. He believed if he could get across quick enough, then they could have their battle. But that's not what ends up happening. And it actually goes incredibly in Robert's favor. That isn't to say the loyalists just get destroyed, because early on in this fight, it actually seems like the loyalists are winning. Lewin Martell early in the battle threatens Robert's left flank, but it ends up not going that way. Sir Lyn Corbray, picking up his wounded father's sword, Lady Forlorn, led a charge and broke the Dornishman. During the charge, Lyn kills the already injured Lewin. Again, showing just the horrors of war, right? Lewin Martell, one of the greatest fighters during this time, and he is someone that was leading the Dornish forces, and he gets slain. Not because it's an honorable death, but because he's already injured, because he's already struggling. And this is a big turning point for the war, right? Because now it's a stabilization. You're seeing that this force is going to be able to push back the loyalists. But none of this really seems to matter. There's some other things that go on during this battle. I think something else to think about, if you are Robert Baratheon, if you are Rhaegar, Why wouldn't you have your best swords with you? If we look at, for instance, Robb Stark is someone that had an honor guard with him during battles. Some of his best and most loyal warriors were with him. That doesn't seem to be the case here between Rhaegar and Robert. And if it was, maybe others were fighting and letting Robert and Rhaegar fight to decide the war and the fate of Westeros. Because you would assume someone like Lewin Martell, you can understand why he's leading the Dornish forces, but at the same time, wouldn't you want that skilled of a warrior with Rhaegar? Because if Rhaegar goes down, the whole thing goes down, right? We've already talked about the motivations of both sides, and by far the loyalist side is much weaker. And so we get to this point where, there's other things that are going on. Barristan Selmy killed several men during this conflict. Lord Jason Mallister slew 3 of Rhaegar Targaryen's bannermen. Again, there's a lot of fighting going on all over this conflict, but what really ends up mattering is how Rhaegar and Robert meet each other. And this is why I feel like this was both of their battle strategies. It feels like this is what everything was coming to, these two deciding who would win, and you can understand why both would want to do so. Robert hates Rhaegar. Remember, Lyanna was betrothed to Robert. Robert has all the anger and motivation to kill Rhaegar. While on the other side of it, Rhaegar might have a similar view in terms of Robert wanted to marry Lyanna, so there's a bit of that jealousy there. But also Rhaegar sees this as a means to an end. Rhaegar knows that he is going to win. That's what the prophecy is going to say. But it doesn't turn out that way. Rhaegar and Robert seem to go back and forth, clashing on horseback, or allegedly clashing on horseback for a while. Even Robert is injured by Rhaegar, showing that Rhaegar was a very solid fighter. I don't think he was the best by any means, but he was still a very good fighter. But eventually Robert crushed Rhaegar's chest with a blow of his warhammer. The blow seemed to be so hard that the rubies adorning Rhaegar's armor were shattered free to litter the river. And that's how it got the name, the Ruby Ford. But we also have some other things that I think are quite interesting to discuss in terms of Rhaegar's death, because this would imply that Rhaegar basically dies upon impact, that this was this fantasized, art. I'm going to show it on my screen because it's always been my background, but think about the way this looks. It looks like this quintessential fantasy art, but that couldn't maybe not be the truth. Maybe that history has romanticized the event, as we see so much in history, because I want to point to even Robert himself recounting the event of Rhaegar's death. It actually does change a little bit in the way we can maybe think about. He stared down at his hands if he did not quite know what they were. I was always strong. No one could stand before me. No one. How do you fight someone if you can't hit them? Confused, the king shook his head. Rhaegar won. Damn him. I killed him, Ned. I drove the spike right through that black armor into his black heart, and he died at my feet. They made up songs about it, yet somehow he still won. So what picture does that paint? That picture does not sound like the picture that we get here. It sounds more like, okay, Robert hits him with the warhammer, Rhaegar's just gone. It basically completely shatters all of his ribs, every bone in his body, and he dies. That's not what that sounds like from Robert, and this is why I question Rhaegar's death. I haven't listened to History of Westeros' podcast on this event in a while, but from what I can remember of it, they even had a similar thought here. Like, this sounds as though Rhaegar was on his knees and was dying, and Robert just basically finished him off. Because dying at his feet would not imply that Robert's on horseback. For Rhaegar to be dying at his feet, it would mean Robert is off his horse. And so I paint this image because it's not a very good look. Robert killing this man, Rhaegar, on his knees, dead. It's a very dark thing to think about. But this one blow is really the end of the Targaryens. It's what sends all the messages to the Greyjoys, to the Lannisters, of who is going to win the conflict. And even during this time and shortly after, Robert makes it known that he is going to become king. He is a logical choice given the idea that He has ties to Aegon the Conqueror. Again, Orys Baratheon was a half-brother to Aegon the Conqueror. They also justify this given that Robert's grandmother was Rhaegar Targaryen, the daughter of Aegon V. And so Robert just has some claims to it, as well as just kind of being the face of the rebellion. As well as, I don't think anyone else really was stepping up to the plate, especially not someone like Ned Stark. We also see some other things, that Barristan is spared, as Roose Bolton wanted him killed, but Robert instead lets the Maesters tend Barristan's wounds and all of those things. But what will follow will be a number of events. We will see the Greyjoys join in last. We will see the sack of King's Landing. But another thing we will see that will have ripple effects even now is that Walder Frey shows up to the battle late. Now, I think we all know that Walder Frey was probably just going to pick the winning side and join them. And this gets Walder Frey the nickname of the late Lord Frey, a jest by Lord Tully, something that would come back to bite his family in the butt moving forward. But that is the end of the Battle of the Trident. That is all that I wanted to cover in today's video. We'll be talking a bit about the Battle of the Mander and some of the Greyjoy stuff going on. That'll kind of be pushed into the Sack of the King's Landing video as well, so I'll kind of have two parts for that. So I'll kind of have that video split up into kind of two within its own video. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys have anything else you guys want to comment or talk about with the Battle of the Trident, I hope I did it due diligence, because it is a very important conflict, something that I think a lot of you guys have been looking forward to getting to in this series. And yeah, I also want to say a thank you to all the support the last video got on it. That was by far, I think, the best video for the series. Probably just because we're getting into the actual meat of the rebellion now, and I had a lot of lead up. I wanted to really give a full picture of this conflict and what everything led to. But thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.